afternoon, Year 3 and Year 4. Today in our history lesson about Paddington, we're going to learn how it came to be considered a creative and artistic community in Sydney. Now, we're going to start during the late 1800s. And during this time, as we know from before, the previous work we've done, this was at a time in Paddington's history when it was really in the rebuilding phase of developing estates into terrace houses. The suburb was becoming known as a place for creative and artistic studios and shops. Photography began to emerge in Australia during the 1840s. By the 1880s, the industry had expanded and was supporting photographic artists in studios. In 1882 to 1891, Alexander Brodie, over here, had a photographic studio in Sutherland Street. From 1883 and 84, Francis Robinson had a photographic studio in Sarah Street. And 1884 to 85, William Roberts had a photographic studio in Paddington as well. So starting to become quite common. Artistic life in Paddington at about the same time. Paddington was also the home to authors, artists and book illustrators. In the 1880s through to 1906, Alfred Walter Heaps made some of the best Australian violins at 46 Oxford Street. He had a shop and a studio there where he and his sons created the violins. In 1890s, Ethel Turner published a magazine, wrote plays, and wrote the book Seven Little Australians while living at 465 Oxford Street. In the 1890s, Dorothy Hill lived in Paddington. She was an illustrator and artist. In the 1890s, Bertram Stevens lived at 65 Glenmore Road. He published a magazine called Art in Australia. And in the late 1890s, the poet Christopher Brennan lived at 77 Cambridge Street. There's a photo of Ethel Turner. We're going to jump forward a little bit here now. Margaret Olley. She was born in 1923 and she died in 2011. She was born in Lismore and her family moved to Brisbane for a few years during her school time. But when she got to 20 years old, she moved to Sydney. Now, she's one of Australia's most famous artists, not just Paddington's most famous artists, but one of Australia's most famous artists. She lived in the suburb for 47 years until her death in 2011. She moved to Sydney when she was 20 so that she could attend the art school at East Sydney Technical College. It's now called the National School of Art. She bought her first house at 70 Paddington Street, then bought another at 48 Duxford Street, where she spent most of her life painting still life artworks of the inside of her home. When her mother and husband both died in the same year, she bought another house in Gurner Street to live, but only lived there a short while before returning to her Duxford Street house. So there's Margaret Olley painting in her home. You can see she's got a lot of things around. She was quite famous for having lots of paintings half finished and lots of decorations around in terms of flowers or fruit, like this one, which is a still life painting, which is one of her paintings. Now, during the 1950s and 60s, there appears to have been little art or creativity in Paddington during the early 1900s and during the war years, probably because there was a depression, the war was there, so art wasn't really something that people could afford to do, or they had other priorities. However, during the 1950s, Paddington was becoming the home of literary and academic types, like we spoke last week about Pat and John Thompson. The housing was still relatively cheap as it began to emerge from its slum and crime state. It was also close to well-regarded art schools, such as East Sydney Technical College in Darlinghurst Jail, which is the one I just spoke about for Margaret Olley, and the Bakery Art School in Paddington Street, where John Olsen and Bill Rose taught. And there's a photo there of Donald Friend teaching an art lesson at Bakery Art School. Artists and creative people began to settle into the area to attend these schools, just as Margaret Olley did as well. Still in the 1950s and 60s, artists were drawn to Paddington and close lifelong friendships developed. From Paddington, where Margaret Olley, Donald Friend and David Strawn were living, from 1967 to 1973, well-known Australian artists John Olsen and Bill Rose ran an art school called Bakery Art in an old bakery in Paddington. And this one is a picture with John Olsen at the Bakery Art. That's John Olsen there, helping a student. The artists all formed strong friendships, often going away together to paint landscapes, particularly to Hill End. Artists in this group included William Drysdale, Rudy Coman, along with John Olsen, Margaret Olley, David Friend and David Strawn. Now we're going to look at some art galleries in Paddington. So we've been looking at artists. Now we're looking at the place where the artworks have been sold. In 1959, Rudy Coman opened the first art gallery in Paddington at 124 Jersey Road on the corner of Paddington Street, called Rudy Coman Art Gallery. During the 1960s, lots of galleries were opened. In 1964, Gallery A opened at 21 Gibbs Street, Paddington. It closed in 1983. The Hungry Horse Art Gallery and Restaurant was one of the first French restaurants in Sydney, opening downstairs with the art gallery upstairs. In 1983, Lucio Galetto took over the lease and renamed the restaurant Lucio's. It developed into an art gallery accidentally when Sidney Nolan sketched an image of Ned Kelly on a docket. Lucio had it framed and Sidney Nolan gifted him an original painting. Now, that went on for many, many artists who used to go to Lucio's for lunch, and they would continue to donate their paintings to him. And you can see there's a photo there from Lucio's with all of his artworks up on the wall. Lucio's closed in 2020 and the artworks were sent to auction. Okay, this is our last slide for today. And this is looking at the art galleries in Paddington now. And you can see that there are, well, this is Paddington and Darlinghurst. But you can see I counted them, there were 18. These red ones are the art galleries. Okay, quite well-known ones. Almost all of them are quite well-known. Seville Gallery has now closed. That closed in 2021. And that building has now been sold as well. So I'm just finishing now showing you off. Here's the Olsen Gallery, Blender Gallery. Of course, Rosalind Oxley Nine Gallery is a big one. Okay, so Paddington has retained its artistic feel, and I've also given you a little bit of knowledge about how that began. Thank you, everyone. Now you've got another video to watch from 1964 that talks about artists in Paddington. And then you've got the closed passage to finish off. Okay, that's it.